We will take another step in learning about the meaning of ethics and morality in session 3B. This we get into some of our deeper ideas. The study of philosophical ethics. Here's a man doing a great deal of thinking. Hopefully, we will think as deeply as he is. Now, the basic meaning of ethics. Ethics is that branch of philosophy that's often called moral philosophy. It consists of a set of principles that guides humans in recognizing and practicing good beliefs and proper actions. I want you to see two or three things there. It's the principles that guide humans in both recognizing and practicing. And it's in recognizing and practicing both good beliefs and proper actions. Ethics, like philosophy in general, considers these principles from the viewpoint of human reason. Philosophical ethics finds its guidance from human reason, from cultural presuppositions, from observation and experience, and from other non-religious sources. Ethics looks, as we have seen a number of times, at these principles of good and bad from both the standpoint of individuals and groups of individuals or societies. Definition. Ethics is a normative science that's made up of rules, regulations, direct teachings that consider the principles of decision making, what we ought to do concerning moral issues and choices. The principles based on reason, standards, results, goals, values, cultural presuppositions, and, very important now, the fact of human freedom to make these choices. And lastly, and certainly not least, the motivation to make the proper choices. That definition contains a tremendous amount of ethical thinking in it. Now, ethics seeks to determine how to have a good life, what a good life is, what our duties and what our rights are in life, what is wrong and right in relation to behavior, how we reach decisions on what is bad or acceptable or unacceptable. What degree should we be active in trying to change matters in our society which we consider unethical, wrong, unjust, or damaging? These are questions that we will be dealing with during the semester. Aristotle wrote that ethics is the science or study of the character, customs, or habits of good conduct seeking the highest good. Greeks were very interested in finding what was the highest good. They called it the summum bonum. We will look at that concept later. Harold Titus, a philosophy teacher who wrote a very good book, in fact, wrote the book I used in college, says that ethics seeks to determine what conduct is good and what is bad, what ought to be approved and disapproved. It wants to furnish a standard for distinguishing between better character and worse character. It's a normative study of the principles underlying the more desirable types of human conduct. Now, ethics is a discipline that studies what people do and what groups do. No, ethics is a discipline that studies what people and groups ought to do rather than what they actually do. Sociology, anthropology, and psychology study more what people actually do. Now, here are 4 books. The Sexual Behavior of the Human Female by Kinsey. Kinsey and his associates interviewed people and asked how they acted sexually, and then wrote the 2 books, Sexual Behavior of the American Female and Sexual Behavior of the American Male. Very big books, but what they did is just describe. Stanley Milgram did the well-known experiment. He was trying to find out if Americans would follow the directions of authoritarian people, even to the extent they would do things they ordinarily would not do. This was an experiment that wired people up, trained people who were pretend that they were being hurt, and then testing other people to see if they would administer or think they were administering shocks to the people. He found out that Americans were about as likely as Germans to do things in response to an authoritative order, even that they would not do ordinarily. In an experiment that some of us feel was not very ethical, Philip Zimbardo divided students at Stanford University into two groups, prisoners and prison guards, and he found out that as they played the roles of the groups he had divided them into, they began to take on the character of those kinds of people. But in all three of these studies, what they were doing was studying what people actually did, not what they ought to do. T.B. Maston, who was my teacher at seminary, wrote this little book, Right or Wrong. It's been used for years and years and years. In it, he gave a number of ways that you could test your decision to see if it was right or wrong. He was actually dealing with ethics, not just finding out what people did, but helping people find out what they ought to do. Now, these other disciplines, archaeology, anthropology, sociology, they all study people and conduct, but in a different way. Archaeology studies prehistoric societies by investigating their physical remains. Its primary method is excavation, digging into what these peoples left and trying to decide how they acted. Anthropology studies existing societies and cultures to understand their institutions, customs, values, and other things. The primary method of anthropology is participant observation. That is, going and living with the people for a full year to understand how they think and act. Sociology is the study of humans living in groups or societies and the influence of these relations on behavior. Primarily, sociologists study their own culture, not other cultures. The primary method is experiment. We just saw some of those in the last moments. Psychology is a study of individual behavior and how various types of behavior arise in humans. Again, it uses experiment as its primary emphasis. Economics is the study of how society produces, uses, and distributes the necessities of life, food, shelter, money, and goods. The primary method is observation. Political science, it studies the institutions by which societies govern themselves, and it looks into the means of social control. The primary method is observation. History studies movements and analyzes events and movements and tries to figure out their influence. But you see, none of these actually does what ethics does, which is to try to decide not what people do, but what they ought to do. Now, ethics derives the concept of right and wrong from a number of sources. Here they are: culture, tradition, religion, natural law, self-interest, observation, and philosophies. We will briefly look at these. What's right or wrong to eat? This is a cultural decision. Most of us would eat beef, and yet there are many people in the world, especially from the Hindu religion, who would refrain from eating beef for various reasons. Muslims and Jews will not touch pork. Some groups of Chinese peoples detested the very idea of drinking milk, thinking it was a very unsafe and unwholesome food. The man here in the corner is about to eat something that most of us wouldn't really want to eat, but many cultures would consider that a delicacy and would find it to be very, very good. Now, here's one that's tougher. Most of us would see that as definitely not a possibility for a meal. But I can tell you that dog meat properly prepared is most tasty, and that there are many peoples in the world who think that that's one of the best foods that you can get. So culture kind of determines what we talk, our language, what we eat, and also how we dress. Now, these guys here are dressed as many in many cultures will dress. Looks more like a woman's sarong, but it's a man's ordinary garment. The lady here is dressed in something that is okay nowadays, but when I was in high school, this would have thought to have been most immodest, and very nice people would never have thought about dressing that way. The guy down in this left corner is wearing a skirt, but where he lives, that's a very manly thing to wear. And the lady on the right is wearing jeans with holes in them, which is stylish today. But my goodness, a few years ago, a person would have been embarrassed to have dressed that way. The tradition decides or determines what is right to be worn. What's right or wrong to do? Religions sometimes have teachings that enter into this. Now, here are some people considering abortion. The Planned Parenthood places to the one side and their church to the other. Their church teaches directly that abortion is wrong, and they would be making a decision. So religious sometimes comes into our decisions. Natural law does. Some people look at the reason things were created and feel that we should guard the environment so that it can be sure to carry out its intended functions. These people are guarding a tree that they feel might be sacrificed to unwholesome matters. Self-interest or service. Ayn Rand, and you see that first name misspelled in various ways, but Ayn Rand, a Russian-born but American writer, novelist, wrote the book The Virtue of Selfishness. She is a main proponent of ethical egoism, which says what you ought to do is whatever is best for you. Every person should do what is best for their interest. On the other hand, Mother Teresa spent her life in service to others. Here we see self-interest or service. That concept can lead us to think what we do. Other people will observe situations, looking at the favela, the slums in Latin America, and then looking at the very luxurious homes in America, and they might say, hey, capitalism produces this kind of life, a socialism produces the other kind, this is better. So observation of situations can have it. Some people base their idea of ethics, what's right and wrong, on philosophical tendencies. Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital and also the Communist Manifesto, and his idea was that capitalism will fail because capitalism is simply a way for the rich to oppress the poor, and that the poor ought to receive the gain that's created by their work. Adam Smith, on the other hand, The Wealth of the Nation, a founder of capitalism. And the two philosophies, people will follow them thinking this is right or that's right. Today, we have another group that are believing in the welfare state with the idea that the government is to take care of the people and people should depend on the government for their well-being. Now, culture and people and societies decide what is wrong in different ways. Some of these are matters of great consequence, but the decisions are reached in various ways. We will look later at the ways people handle the situation with family members who passed away. There are different ways that people express respect and solidarity. Some burn the bodies of deceased relatives, some bury them, some place them in temporary places and recover the bodies later for some rituals. Some place the bodies on platforms and leave them, and some even eat the bodies of their deceased family members. Which is best? We will discuss that later. The consequential matter is respect and community solidarity. So ethics looks to different ways that people have of making decisions and seeks those that are the better.